Hi there and welcome to this day in history for January 12th. January 12th is the 12th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar with 353 days remaining until the end of the year except for leap years, in which case there are 354 days remaining to the end of the year. For the next few days, we're going to take a look at words that have a variety of meanings. And the first one we're going to look at is gob. One meaning of gob is a lump or a large amount of something, which probably comes from Middle French, gobe or goob, and means mouthful or lump. The earliest documented use of it in this context is 1382. The second meaning of gob that we'll look at is mouth, which probably comes from Irish or Scottish Gaelic gob, which means beak or mouth, and the earliest documented use of it in this context is 1568. Before we go on, I'd like to remind you that links to my research are included in the show notes, and I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and click that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to share this video and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. And with that, we're going to start in the year 1838 when Joseph Smith abandoned Ohio. His Mormon bank failed in the Panic of 1837, so Joseph Smith fled Kirtland, Ohio to avoid arrest, and he headed for Missouri to rebuild his religious community. American novelist and journalist Jack London was born on January 12th of 1876. He wrote a few books, one of which is entitled Call of the Wild, and I remember having read that as a child, but right this minute I don't remember a lot about it. Unfortunately, Jack had a lot of pretty awful health issues and died when he was only 40 years old. On January 12th of 1888, there was a terrible, fast-moving blizzard that swept across the northwest plains of America and killed about 235 people, most of whom were school children on their way home from school. The storm came with no warning, and some accounts say the temperature fell as much as 100 degrees in just 24 hours. It was a Thursday afternoon, and there had been unseasonably warm weather from the previous day from Montana east to the Dakotas and south to Texas. Suddenly, within a matter of hours, Arctic air from Canada rapidly pushed south. Temperatures plunged to 40 below zero in much of North Dakota. Along with the cool air, the storm brought high winds and heavy snows. The combination created blinding conditions. Most victims of the blizzard were children making their way home from school in rural areas and adults working on large farms. Both had difficulty reaching their destinations in the awful conditions. In some places, though, caution prevailed. School teacher Seymour Dopp in Pawnee City, Nebraska, kept his 17 students at school when the storm began at 2 p.m. They stayed overnight, burning stockpiled wood to keep warm. The next day, parents made their way over 5-foot snowdrifts to rescue their children. In Great Plains, South Dakota, 2 men rescued the children in a schoolhouse by tying a rope from the school to the nearest shelter to lead them to safety. Minnie Freeman, a teacher in Nebraska, successfully led her children to shelter after the storm tore the roof off her one-room schoolhouse. Not everybody fared so well, but we won't dwell on that. That storm is still considered one of the worst blizzards in the history of the area, and makes me especially grateful for the weather forecasting technology we have available to us now. On January 12th of 1904, Henry Ford set a speed record. He set a land speed record of 91.37 miles per hour on the frozen surface of Michigan's Lake St. Clair. He was driving a four-wheeled vehicle dubbed the 999 with a wooden chassis but no body or hood. Ford's record was broken within a month at Ormond Beach, Florida by a driver named William K. Vanderbilt. Even so, the publicity surrounding Ford's achievement was valuable to the auto pioneer, who in June of the previous year had incorporated the Ford Motor Company, which would eventually go on to become one of America's big 3 automakers. On January 12 of 1919, leaders of the Big Four nations, France, Italy, Britain, and the United States, met for the first time in Paris for the first of what would be more than 100 meetings. On January 12th of 1926, the original Amos and Andy debuted on Chicago radio. This was a two-man comedy series known at the time as Sam and Henry, debuted on Chicago's WGN radio station. 2 years later, they changed their name to Amos and Andy, and the show became one of the most popular radio programs in American history. Amos and Andy came to television in 1951, and I've placed a link to an episode in the show notes if you'd like to see it. Amos and Andy ran on television until 1953, and the final radio broadcast of Amos and Andy aired on November 25th, 1960. On January 12th, 1932, Hattie Wyatt Caraway became the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate. On January 12th of 1943, Soviet forces penetrated the siege of Leningrad. I believe we've mentioned the siege of Leningrad before when the Germans sought to surround Leningrad. But on this day, Soviet troops created a breach in the German siege of Leningrad, which had lasted for a year and a half. The Soviet forces punched a hole in the siege, which ruptured the German encirclement and allowed for more supplies to come in along Lake Ladoga. I was surprised to learn that today is the birthday of American talk show host and author Rush Limbaugh, who turned 69 today. On January 12th of 1954, the United States announced a policy of massive retaliation against communist aggressors. In a speech at a Council on Foreign Relations dinner in his honor, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles announced that the United States would protect its allies through the deterrent of massive retaliatory power. The policy announcement was further evidence of the Eisenhower administration's decision to rely heavily upon the nation's nuclear arsenal as the primary means of defense against communist aggression. On January 12, 1962, an operation called Operation Ranch Hand was initiated. It sounds innocuous enough, and it was designed to expose the roads and trails used by the Viet Cong. They dumped an estimated 19 million gallons of defoliating herbicides, over 10 to 20% of Vietnam and parts of Laos, between 1962 and 1971. They called it Agent Orange, named for the color of its metal containers. And Agent Orange was the most frequently used defoliating herbicide. The operation succeeded in killing vegetation, but not in stopping the Viet Cong. The use of these agents was controversial, both during and after the war, because of the questions about long-term ecological impacts and the effects on humans who either handled or were sprayed by the chemicals. This is the birthday of American computer scientist and businessman Jeff Bezos, who, as most of you surely know, founded Amazon.com. He turns 56 today. In 1966, Lyndon B. Johnson stated that the United States should stay in South Vietnam until communist aggression there was ended. On January 12th of 1981, a TV show called Dynasty premiered on ABC. January 12th, 1995, Malcolm X's daughter was arrested for attempted murder. Kabila Shabazz, the daughter of Malcolm X, was arrested for conspiring to kill Louis Farrakhan. Shabazz believed that Farrakhan was responsible for the assassination of her father in 1965 and sought to exact revenge through a hired killer. Subsequently, Shabazz admitted her responsibility but not guilt in the charges, and the government accepted a plea bargain. On this day in 1998, 19 European nations agreed to forbid human cloning. On January 12, 2003, Manx Australian singer-songwriter, guitarist, and producer Maurice Gibb, member of the band The Bee Gees, died on this date at the age of 53. And on January 12th of the year 2010, an earthquake occurred in Haiti, killing over 100,000 people and destroying much of the capital, Port-au-Prince. It did draw an outpouring of support from around the globe, but the small nation has yet to fully recover. And that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Again, links to my research are included in the show notes. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. It helps if you actually remember to hit the record button. Open wide. There, there's a little birdie on my front porch. Alrighty, back to work. Okie dokie, Smokey. Okay, that's all one long sentence. All right. That's a lot of words. I don't know how to say that. Well, figure it out in editing. I'm going to have a lot of edits here. We did that yesterday. Some things just can't be done. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. See, this is what happens when we're not scripted. This is why I don't do live shows.